Life in the Vine. This is what I'm going to be talking about, our life in community. Looking at our theme here, this was the inspiration here. The sole purpose for which we are born is that we may perform a use to the community we are in, and to our neighbor, while we live in the world, and in the next life may perform a use in accord with the Lord's gracious purposes. This inspired Jenna and Andrew to, this topic. And here's what we advertise, that we will explore ways that we exist to serve the communities that we are in, and talk about what those communities are. And that will be really my focus today. The aim will be to help us think of our role in meeting the challenges of a rapidly changing world and being a force for good. Rapidly changing world. I'm not sure I'm going to address that, really.
It's a big topic.
Yeah. But I think the principles apply to any world that we live in. And that's really the timeless truth that we're going to be looking at from the heavenly doctrine for the new church. The Lord, of course, said, I am the true vine. My Father is the vine dresser. The unity of divine good and divine truth here, Father and Son. Every branch in me that doesn't bear fruit, he takes away, and every branch that bears fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. You are already pruned because of the word which I have spoken to you. He's talking to his disciples at the very end of his ministry with them. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. And I have some beautiful highlighting that's not showing it all here, but highlighting on abide in me and bears much fruit. Oh well. You know what you managed to do on your computer doesn't always come across.
You can see it now you pointed it out.
Anyway, so, two things, really two focuses. One, I'm looking at what the writings say about the whole, about that vine, and how the Lord manages that, which I think are just kind of fascinating and inspiring. And then we're going to look at what the writings say about the different communities within that vine, as it were. But anyway, yeah, first of all, there is just one vine, which is, of course, the Lord, but from the standpoint of humanity, it's our reception of the Lord. And Swedenborg writes in his Journal of Spiritual Experiences, the universal human race from the first creation must form a one. So the universal creation is growing and growing and growing exponentially throughout the universe, we can imagine. We can't imagine. I think it's beyond imagination. But anyway, that the Lord is guiding it all as a one. And in the work Divine Providence, from which I'm going to quote here, it starts out on the note that the Lord's goal in creation is a heaven from the human race. And we think of heaven as, I hope I go to heaven. The Lord's creating people and bringing them into heaven. But the way the writings present it is not the Lord's just taking people and pulling them into heaven. It's the Lord is managing heaven as a one. And as that heaven grows, everything has to proceed in order and build according to his wisdom. Anyway, thinking of that, we read here, the Lord, by means of his divine providence, arranges the affections of the whole human race into one form, which is the human form. The Lord created the universe in order that there might exist in it an infinite and eternal creation from himself. And this creation exists that the Lord might form from people a heaven which should appear before him as one human being who should be the image and likeness of himself. And it continues, the infinite and eternal aim which the Lord looks to in forming his heaven from people is that it may be extended to infinity and eternity, and thus his aim is that he may constantly dwell in the end of his creation. So, he's not just, inserting people into heaven. He's creating them designed to be able to fit in as that heaven grows, and with his view of it extending to infinity and eternity. So, you were born at this time, in this place, for a reason. You couldn't have been born 1,000 years ago because heaven wouldn't have been ready for you. And same with people 1,000 years from now, they have to be where they are so that they can be woven into that form to receive his life. So, the Lord creates individuals who are designed to be able to find a home in this evolving oneness. Again, I've highlighted design there. Design. Again, from Divine Providence here, from that same section. Now, since an individual human being by creation is a heaven in the least form, and consequently an image of the Lord, and since heaven consists of many affections as there are angels, and each affection in its form is a human being, it follows that it is the continual design of the divine providence that a person may become a heaven in form, image and likeness of him, so that it can fit into the bigger image and likeness. But it goes on to say, although this big stuff is the design of the divine providence, its inmost design is that the person may be in this or that place in the divine heavenly man. For thus they are in the Lord. So the inmost, actually that word design is not in the Latin, but the inmost, his inmost wish really is to interact with individuals, because we don't exist. There's no big man out there that's a personality. No, it exists from individuals that make it up, and it's in us that he has a relationship, a personal relationship with.
And by each of us having an affection, that's the way, that's just us, that's our being, our personality, our likes, our loves, all those kind of things.
Yes.
Right.
By the way, this is sort of an unusual way to use affection, because we have lots of affections in us, don't we? But when it talks about the whole, then it talks about the Lord's love, and we are all affections. So
we're just a part of that.
Some things is love.
We're just a part of that.
Yeah.
And are an individual and unique part of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So his goal is that we may be in this or that place in the divine heavenly man.
But can I just ask, what does it mean by this or that place?
Well,
than just saying one of them.
I mean, we're somewhere. We're not just anywhere. We are in this or that place. And maybe that also reflects human choice, right? In that the Lord's not forcing us into any place. We are, in a sense, choosing our place.
How does that relate to states? In the spiritual world, there is no place or time. So this or that, is it also referencing this or that state?
Yes, yeah. A place is, a spiritual place is determined by our love, our ruling love. And that's what slots us in relation to other people. Because love is what draws people together. And so differences of love sort of push them apart, or relate them in different ways. By the way, this is the Lord, and in a way we can think of heaven as the Lord, and sometimes the writings call heaven God, and yet it's not really God because it's evolving. It's human reception of him. So it's he's the soul and life of it, but heaven itself is growing. So obviously we exist for others. That's why we're created to be part of this. Human beings are born not for the sake of themselves, but for the sake of others. That is, they are born not to live for theirself alone, but for others. Otherwise, there would be no cohesive society nor any good in it. And let's see, I'm trying to move this along, and why isn't that working? I must have turned it off. Sorry. You see, I highlighted that cohesive society.
Yep.
There we go. I love that word, cohesive. Cohire, drawn together. Beautiful word. All right. So, we are born for the sake of others, and we find our good through others. We find our good in the common good. And this is what the writings say in regard to government in the spiritual heaven. But I think it applies to all levels of heaven. Does someone else want to read? Get another voice in here? Thank you, Karen.
All forms of government in the Lord's spiritual kingdom agree in this, that they look to the public good as their end, and in that good to the good of the individual. And this is so because everyone in the whole heaven is under the auspices of the Lord, who loves all, and from divine love ordains that there shall be a common good, from which each individual shall receive their own good.
Yeah. I've just highlighted in that good. So all the laws look to the public good as their end, and in that public good to the good of the individual. And that makes sense, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, our good only exists in relation to the public good. So we find our good in the public good, and yet we find our individual, and yet, despite that, there is an interdependence between individual good and public good, common good. Yeah, of course, the common good, from the doctrine of charity here, exists from the goods of use which individuals perform. And the goods of use that individuals perform subsist from the common good. So there would be no general good if there weren't a particular good, right? It is known, also in the doctrine of charity here, it is known that the goods of use which individuals perform subsist from the general good, for each one derives their particular good of use from the general good. By the way, that word common and that word general are the same Latin word, commune. So the translator has to decide the best way to translate that, because, you know, when you're talking about generals and particulars, it's nice to say general, but it's really the same word, common good. So, in that common good, the Lord works through individuals to create the common good and to do good to other individuals in that common good.
Can I just ask, how
Yes.
do you define what the public good is or the common good? Is that through the democratic process, or is it some other way?
Well, I guess he gives us an as of self, doesn't he, in defining that public good. And so in the world it changes, doesn't it, what that civil good is. But in heaven it really,
So it's,
well,
it's following spiritual principles, is it? That this kind of society should have these values?
mhm.
The spiritual community should have certain values?
That's a good question. I think there always is human determination in responding to divine law, right? I mean, we have the Word to guide us, but the Lord's always asking us to put into practice through our response to Him. So yeah, there's always going to be a little relativity there, isn't there, in what that public good is. That's probably true in heaven, too. Anyway, this is kind of obvious. I just flash up one passage here. The Lord cannot do good to a person directly, but only mediately, through people. In other words, we are a means, a medium of His working. So He inspires people with His own love. But wow, could do a little philosophy here, where the writings talk about how the whole is more perfect because of the individuals, distinct individuals that make it up. But it's such a beautiful reality of human life. You know, when we get to know people who are so unique, and sometimes we struggle with people who are so unique, and yet, wow, what a perfect world, a more perfect world it is. So anyway, this is from, again, Divine Providence from the very beginning. Someone want to read? Nice and loud, okay, because Andrew's recording. Fritz, you want to read?
All right. A form makes one more perfectly in proportion as those things which enter into it are distinct from one another and are yet united. There is an appearance that a form can only make one through similarity and equality in those constituents which make up the form. On this subject I have very frequently conversed with angels. And they affirmed that the more every individual has a distinct character of their own, and so in freedom loves their associates as though from their self and from their own affection, the more perfect is the form of the society.
Yeah, the more distinct the character and in freedom, participating, the more perfect is the society. And here's another passage that extends this idea from the Last Judgment, 12. Anybody else want to read?
I'm happy to if nobody else wants to.
Oh, thank you, Aidan.
So the perfection of heaven increases according to its numbers of people. This is evident from heaven's form, according to which its associations are disposed in order, and its communications flow, for it is the most perfect form of all, and in proportion to the increase of numbers, in that most perfect form, there is given a direction and consent of more and more people to unity, and therefore a closer and a more unanimous conjunction.
Yeah, and the passage continues here.
More on unity and perfection from harmony of parts. AC 3629 4149.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
You were supposed to read the start of the paragraph at the top.
Sorry.
See, I went like this.
Right.
There we go.
Didn't see the top change.
Right,
Yeah.
sorry.
That's a lot for you to read as well, Mum.
Yeah.
So someone else needs to take over.
Every form consists of various parts. A form which does not consist of various parts is not a form, for it has no quality, no distinct character, and no changes of state. The quality of every form results from the arrangement of the various things within it, from their relationship to each other, and from their consent to unity. From this arrangement, every form is considered as a one. Such a form is more perfect, according to the number of the various things arranged within it, for every one of them confirms, corroborates, conjoins, and so perfects.
Thank you. Yeah. So, the more people there are, the greater the variety, the form of whatever unit becomes more perfect. There's more direction, directio. I wasn't sure exactly what that implied, but maybe a sense of direction. Fuller consent to unity, closer and more unanimous conjunction, and each unit in that confirms, that is, strengthens, corroborates, conjoins, and so perfects the whole. So it's just a beautiful way of thinking of the importance of people, all those people.
So Grant, this is people in general, or people in a specific community? Because I find it hard to believe that the world is getting more perfect at the moment.
Yeah, well, it's really hard for us to judge that kind of thing, isn't it?
It might be getting more perfect, it's just that you can't see it.
Yeah.
I certainly
Thanks.
can't see it.
Yeah. Well, some people have said that the level of violence in the world is far less today than it was, 1,000 years ago or 200 years ago. That there are many, many things that, rule of law, when you take the whole human race, I think might be stronger today than it was 100 years ago or two.
These might just be machinations along the journey.
Yeah, it's hard for us to see the big picture, isn't it? Yeah, Dave.
I'd be interested in your reflections on consent to unity. So
Mhm.
you have the individualism, but you have the consent to unity.
I'm coming back to consent to unity.
Oh,
the section. My conclusion.
So that's a good point, isn't it? If they don't consent to unity, they're not going to be part of forming the perfection.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think these principles do apply in the world, but they apply supremely in heaven, where people have that consent to unity and are willing to follow the Lord and His laws. So we encounter problems here because of the participants who are not part of the Lord's kingdom, and choosing not to be part of His kingdom. Isn't it amazing, we rarely see crowds this big. Karen and Stuart and I went to the coronation together in London, and we saw crowds like this. But whenever you get in those crowds, do you just look at people and wondering, how can every one of these human beings be thinking things, and having plans, and it just boggles the mind. And we're part of, 7 billion on this planet alone, or is it 8 now? I don't know how many. The Lord's doing amazing work. And yet, I want to switch gears here and focus back on the individual unit, the self. I walk to work or ride my bike just about every day, and because I live in London, I pass probably hundreds of people. Okay, there are 5, 10, 20, 50. Just as you walk down the street, hundreds of people. And one of the thoughts I have is often when I reflect, what am I thinking about, and what are they thinking about? Well, I'm usually thinking about myself. I have to watch my feet, make sure that I don't step on that hunk of crud in the street, on the pavement. I have to lift my feet to avoid this and that, and avoid people, and constantly negotiating yourself and the world around you. And I'm thinking about my work. What do I need to accomplish today? Oh, I have to go so-and-so. We're focused on ourselves. And so I think, wow, look at that. All these people walking along, most of them not talking, they're just, engaged. They're thinking about themselves, aren't they? Probably. Not that use isn't a factor at all, but this is the nature of life, and I think it's useful to think about that. The old biomass food chain, there's all this stuff down at the bottom, and that has to be there in order for the next level to subsist. And then you have the primary guys up at the top, and the same with pyramids of biomass. Got all this stuff at the bottom, and then very few people at the top, carnivores at the top. Human beings really subsist based on that pyramid. But this reminds me of our own lives, that in order for this to exist, there has to be this stuff down here. And the writings talk about these 4 levels here. Concern and awareness for ourself, and concern and awareness for the world and our resources and what we're working with. And then there's that concern for the neighbor and concern for the Lord, which are what our priorities are supposed to be, right? Those should be the ruling loves, and these loves should serve the higher. And yet, where do we spend most of our time? Down there, right? Is that a bad thing? Will it change after death? Is it going to be like this? I'm not sure. I'm not sure that it will. maybe in priority. I don't know, do you have any thoughts on that?
If you're talking about a pyramid of parts, each part built upon the lower part, if the lower part is insecure, you're not going to be able to build much on top of it.
And it's a bit like that with children. They first of all have to realise themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and then they can
Then they
think
become
about
aware of the
the
world.
world and aware of friends and people and things like that. But
Uh-huh.
I would have hoped that the Lord would be a bit further down, actually.
Grant,
Yes.
do you want to respond to it?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Yeah, but one of the things I'm thinking about in this picture, it's quite an interesting perspective, is that the idea we should be like moving up in the pyramid,
Uh-huh.
and that the lower levels, they cannot really exist in heaven. We should be serving others and ultimately serve the Lord instead of working on ourselves and
Mm-hmm.
more evil loves. And on the other hand, I do agree with what Jan said. I think that the lower level needs to be secure in order to be able to act on a higher level. And
Yeah.
like this Maslow pyramid as well, that was the same
Yeah.
idea as,
I mean,
That's so
these are good loves, right? These lower loves are good loves by creation. And yet they're the root of the problem because we invert them. We make these our priority rather than these here. And so that's the origin of evil, is the flip-flopping of that order. But you acknowledge that there's a reality here, that we do have to, in a way, spend a lot of time here. Yeah. So that's not a bad thing. And you know, something I mentioned in the spring when we were doing The Lord is My Shepherd, it's interesting that we love that psalm, and it's very, you know, in the prayer we say, Our Father, forgive us, etc. In the 23rd Psalm we say, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. You know, the Lord, His inmost design is that we be in this or that place. It's us, you know. It's interacting with us. And so we have to have this self. That self is very, very important to the Lord. So,
And we have to be very much aware of how we're acting. If we didn't have that awareness of self, we wouldn't have that, you know, perspective of what we're doing. And I was encouraged once when we had a minister who said he didn't spend, most of the day he didn't spend thinking about heaven. And I thought, wow. And that was a very honest thing to say, but you can't go around everyday life all the time thinking about the Lord. You can spend an awful lot of your day thinking about other people. Get that.
yeah.
But I think
Well, it's certainly a process of you know, coming to prioritize these more and more, and to see these in there, you know, to see them down in the self. But yeah, I recognize what you're saying. I think it's true. All right. Well, back to these the hordes of humanity. The writings say that back to the relation of ourself to this, they say every person is neighbor to their self. It is a common saying. But the doctrine of charity teaches how this is to be understood. It is obvious, of course, that everyone must provide their self with the necessaries of life, as food, clothing, dwelling, and the many other things which their civil life demands. They must do this not only for their self, but also for their family, and not only for the present, but also for the future. For if anyone does not procure for their self the necessaries of life, being in want of all things, they are not in a position to exercise charity. But how every person ought to be a neighbor to their self may be seen from the following comparison. Every person ought to provide their body with food. This must be first. But the end should be that they may have a sound mind in a sound body. And every person ought to provide their mind with food, namely with such things as pertain to intelligence and judgment. But the end should be that this may be, that by this, their fellow citizens, society, their country, the church, and thus the Lord. So this is a nice segue into looking at those degrees of the neighbor. So yeah, there we are. I don't know how well my colors kind of work here, but it's the individual, and then there are all those individual fellow citizens that we are to love and serve. And then the writers talk about societies or groups, and then one's country, and the church, and the Lord's kingdom, and the Lord. So these are levels, like steps of a ladder, the writers say. Sometimes they call that level above the church the communion of saints, which is heaven and really the spiritual life of everybody. Sometimes, very rarely, they call it the human race. And I guess the problem with human race is that includes evil people too. But anyway, it's usually the Lord's kingdom. And this is the common good, good of all. So, focusing back down here and looking at these levels, here we are. Who are the most prominent individuals in your lives? Can you think of 10?
Family?
Yeah, family are probably included in that. 10's a pretty big number, though, isn't it? I think probably most of us primary individuals that bump up and against each and every day. I don't know. So, how do we serve and how do we love and serve these individuals?
Quite easily, I think. Yes.
By charity towards them.
Mm-hmm. Define charity.
Uses.
Helping them, loving them, listening to them.
Mm-hmm.
Picking them up when they're down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Putting them before yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's very compelling, isn't it? Because those people, they're right there, and they were connected to that.
Euron's comment from his talk this morning. Do as you would be done by.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do as you would be done by, yeah. So, moving to the next level, if we could, a society is the neighbor more than a single person. More than a single person. Because it consists of many. Charity is to be exercised toward it in a like manner as toward a person singly, namely according to the quality of the good that is with it. Thus, in a manner totally different toward a society of the upright than toward a society of those not upright. The society is loved when its good is regarded from the love of good. I didn't talk about it, but this chapter on charity actually begins by defining charity as loving what is good in others. So, in the individual, we're loving and serving them, but the writings would say we're especially trying to bring out the good and love the good because that's in their interest, right? So we don't love the bad and serve the bad because that's not in their real interest. So that's what makes exercising charity difficult, isn't it? Because we sometimes have to hold back when there are things there that we can't support. It's tough.
Right.
But anyway...
Is there a distinction between a society and a community?
No. Societas means just I think a gathering of people. So that was going to be a question that I asked is what communities or groups do you interact with? And what are they? So what are these groups that we're to love in a higher degree than we love individuals? Because there's greater impact there. Because more individuals' goods are involved in them. What are communities? How do you think about this one?
Well, I think that this church should be a community.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the obvious one. I thought that would be, sorry, for me that's obvious. But you could also think about the communities in which you work. To see if you can love people within that, the work community.
Mm-hmm.
Work community.
Yeah, your work community, it's a major community.
I think each of us belong
and,
to multiple communities.
I agree that a
And they
church,
change constantly.
our local church group, I think is a society, but we'll look at that when we look there. Yes,
I was just thinking, like the choir I belong to is a
Yeah,
community. We're joined
absolutely.
together by we all love singing, and that is the most important thing,
Mhm.
rather than any individual.
Yeah.
And it's a school is an environment where many people are involved, parents and staff, and
yeah.
all
and,
of that
and a
is
classroom
has
of students.
a
Your
classroom of
your
students,
children
yeah.
this morning.
And
we
a
talked about
Facebook
this.
group of fungi collectors.
Mm-hmm.
We all love mushrooms and
Uh-huh.
you
Yeah.
know, that sort of thing. Those are all communities.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, should a community be defined by like a common activity, or could it also be like a neighborhood, with people who happen to live
Sure.
next to each other, but
Yeah.
may help
Be
out
any
with
of those.
someone?
Yeah, because there's a good, a common good there, isn't there? That
Yeah,
is at
spending
stake
life.
in that community.
I think it's also a common passion and a common goal. So we would classify our village as a community,
Yeah.
not because we live there, because there are people that have long moved away that are still very much part of that community, but because we love the place,
Mm-hmm.
because we have this common goal to make that place a nicer place to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. So your local bank that you belong to is a community. Sainsbury's down the street, there's a community there that serves. Yeah, so communities, there are very many of them. Which ones affect our life most? Well, some do more than others, right? How do we love and serve them? How do you serve your choir group?
I'm on the committee.
Okay, there's a way you're helping organize and enable that event to take place. Okay, what else? Yeah, going on.
By doing what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, by participating, by being a useful member. How might you not serve? That's a good way to think of how you serve.
Sing at the wrong time, out of tune.
Yeah. Rabble rouser,
Chatting.
interrupting,
during rehearsal, yeah.
Chatting during rehearsal.
Not paying your taxes, dues.
What's that?
Not paying your dues or
Not paying your
subscription.
dues? Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of negative things that we avoid in order to serve all of these neighbors.
But I'd like to, if I may, just bring it back to the individuals.
Mm-hmm.
You can serve the community by paying attention to the needs of individuals within that community.
Yeah, that's a good point, and it's very hard to serve an amorphous community because it consists of individuals. Yeah.
There may be common purposes, but you know, if you're in an orchestra and your partner just can't play that bit, you might just spend a few moments to help them as an individual.
So where's the tension between serving a group as a higher neighbor than serving an individual of that group?
Yeah, because you're automatically part of a group if you're part of a street, as an example. So though you'd be individual, right, you haven't gone out of your way, but you're part of the street, so whatever your action is will affect your neighbours. So, so groups and individuals are pretty sometimes interact, one or the other, it happens all the time. So you don't have to be saying, I'm part of a group, you're automatically part of a group. Right, so so it can get confusing on that little boundary there.
It's interesting, I think back to COVID and our community within our village, the amount of times somebody would message going, I haven't seen this person for a few days. Can someone just go and knock on their door and make sure they're okay? Does anyone have their number, can give them a quick call?
I think
that's serving those individuals, but that between us all loves the greater whole of the entire community.
That's the point, yeah.
I started, in response to John, I started a thread or a thought that there can be a conflict between loving an individual and loving the group. In other words, someone may want you to talk to them in the choir during choir practice.
Yeah.
And you might think, oh, I have to talk to this person. Well, no, the bigger good at that time is to, be part of the group. And then maybe prioritize by later
sorry.
helping.
But why is that? Because surely if you help the individual, the whole group benefits more than
No.
if you say,
Not if you're talking during rehearsals.
That's what I was
We got into trouble when we first met 50 odd years ago through talking during rehearsals.
The truth's coming out now.
But one might argue you're sat here 50 years later, and how much of the pair of you served between you? So actually, that talking may have served a greater cause.
He's sitting over there.
well, one of them.
No comment.
Yes.
Okay, next level, society, then there's the country, and the writings say this is more a neighbor because it's like a parent, it nourishes and protects from injuries, defends and enables that civil good to exist on the societal level. So we're supposed to love our country more, in a higher degree. Be willing to die for it, the writings say.
Yep.
Yes and no. Because
Well-
if my country gets led in a direction which is
Mm-hmm.
totally opposite to my beliefs and values, that causes me a bit of a conflict.
Yeah. Civil disobedience is there's a reason why people are pushed to that. So yeah, the conscience always has to, come into play, doesn't it?
Actually, that's not quite right, because if you think about the country is what everybody, and that you want it to be one. Yes, it can be led in one direction, right? But you still want it to be led in the right direction.
Yeah.
So you could be part of something that tries to push it back the other way. It is bigger than you are, whatever, and you can't ignore it. Basically, without, well, if you do ignore it, it's at your peril in some respects,
Yeah.
or whatever. Or if you don't like it, get out in an odd way.
Mm-hmm.
If it's just not your thing, then you're maybe in the wrong place.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's the same all the way down in an odd way. And some people do that,
Yeah.
and they become the loners, because ultimately they push themselves out of society and everything else like that. So I think, yes, your country is important. You can love your country. You don't necessarily have to say it's going in the right direction, but you can say, well, I want to change it.
Yeah.
It's a very difficult one. It's not a. It's something you're joining, but didn't want to join it. You're born into it.
Mm-hmm.
Most people don't get a chance to do anything but be part of that country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think some people reject their country of birth fairly early on. It's not inbuilt that you have to love your country. Not everybody does.
Mm-hmm.
Like not everybody loves their parents.
Right. Yeah. Loving the neighbor is loving the good in them. And that would be true on every level. So if you see good in your country, what are the good things about your country that you can love and support? So that's really what you're looking at. And how do you do that? How do you have an impact on your country that you, it's so big in a way, but how do you love it? How do you serve it?
By obeying their laws, by using your vote. So, if you want to try and influence the country, use your vote.
Mm-hmm.
In a democracy.
Yeah,
In a
participate.
democracy, yes, but yes.
Obey the laws, it's a huge one.
Yeah, that's true. But there are people who are not in democracy, who speak out and get shot or poisoned. But that is another way of trying to serve your country, because they hope that their sacrifices will not be made in vain.
But by doing the things that Eric was talking about. You can serve your country by your day job.
Yeah. Yeah. So, the next level is the church. The church is the neighbor more than our country. For those who have regard for the church, have regard for the souls and eternal life of the people who are in their country. Therefore, people who provide for the church from love the neighbor in a higher degree, for they wish and will heaven and happiness of life to eternity to others. So what is the church here? Is it an organization?
Church universal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the good and the true. That isn't the church universal? What's the difference between the church universal and the church in specific?
Everyone who's trying to live according to their beliefs and has a
Yeah, that's universal, isn't it? Belief in God and practice of religion is the way the regs define that. Is it important to love your own church that and its doctrines more than the church universal? Yeah.
I like the next part of the sentence with have regard for the souls and eternal life of the people. If you care for in your interactions the actual soul and sort of have in the back of your mind their eternal happiness, are you serving the church in them? Is that, if that's really important to you, is that in that way it's the church universal or specific if you're thinking about anyone in your own church organization or anyone else?
Yeah. The reason I was sort of gently challenging Kathy's statement is that if we really care about the souls and the eternal life, we care about the doctrines that are true, that promote that. Whereas there are many religions people are practicing sincerely, but they're not leading people as surely and directly to what's constructive, to what's
yeah, but I don't know, when there's a conflict between those two, I'm not sure. I think there are times, aren't there? I mean, my lovely neighbour Pam, she has some different ideas, but she's it's a great source of comfort to her, and she tries to. But there are certainly a few differences. But I would never try and correct her, because she's so strong in her beliefs. I don't think it would be very charitable for me to say, well, actually, Pam, you got that wrong.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and I don't know how much it would really be a conflict. I know in Michael Church we let a church use our building after we use it on every Sunday, and there's a prayer group that meets, and other religious groups asked to work there, and we're happy to support that, because we want people to believe in God, and eternal life, even if they don't believe the way we believe. So I think
we had a minister's. Well, I can't remember what it was called. The days we used to have when the ministers would come and people from the others.
A clergy association and.
Well, no, I don't know what it was. We just had I think it was called a study day actually. We'd have it on a Saturday, and I remember it was you had a question time. You could throw any question you wanted without them having any preparation time. And I said, would you be pleased if the church down the road was doing well? Didn't really. Well, not a non-new church. Would you be pleased if it was flourishing? One down the road near us. And and one of the ministers was not in agreement with the other two. Yeah, that was very interesting. Let's see who they were.
Well, I just think it's good if anybody believes in God or a higher being, and they stand a better chance of leading better lives and finding happiness and being in heaven. I do.
Yeah, Andrew.
I mean, I personally feel that the church specific is very important for the life of the country, because as you hear from Sarah, the church specific has really influenced the life of the country in very positive ways, which you often don't realise just how much there has been influence. For example, the abolition of slavery, which was led by Britain, was based on the new church teachings, And people don't, it's never taught that that's the case, but it's such a big thing in the world, and that's such a big, so that the church has had a major influence on positive things in this world since it came, since the second coming. And you just don't see, so the church universal is really important to save people's souls, but the church specific is also vital as well for the country.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I strongly agree with what you're saying there. Thinking about, well, what would the world be like without the ability to distinguish between good and evil? And, we talked about in the last session about some of the tumultuous nature of our culture. Is it worse than it used to be? However. But if you remove that, and I do agree with Sarah, who's speaking so strongly here in this, that there is this profound influence that the new church specifically has had on the ability to differentiate between good and evil. And if you take that away from a culture, what is going to happen? And that, to me, is terrifying.
I also think, Andrew, that what you said is really quite dramatic if we think about all the things that have happened. I mean, the last night of the proms, everybody sings Jerusalem. And yet we don't tell them.
But Blake was thinking of the church,
That's right. Yeah, we don't say it. But yet millions of people sing that song/hymn.
British history is the church, actually.
In fact, it was the BBC voted for a replacement for God Save the Queen, and Jerusalem was voted as the nation's favourite piece to replace God Save the Queen or King if we were to retire that.
Well, we could always put a post on Facebook.
Did you know?
Random facts.
That is one way of having an impact, isn't it? You can put posts on Facebook. Do people want to know? But maybe, you never know.
Well, if I could bring us back, I think that, I asked the question, is this just a community, our local church, or is it something bigger? And I would say that this, of course, is something bigger the way we're talking about it, the church universal and the church specific. But I think it's also organizational in that those beliefs are held by people in an organization. And that organization needs to exist and needs to be supported. And so, for my part, yes, I'm trying to love my country, but I love the church more than I love the country because of the spiritual life that it fosters.
And I would add to that it needs to be visible. I had someone that I was speaking to this past week who said, Swedenborgians, I thought that was something from the 19th century. I didn't know they existed today. This woman very sincerely said that to me.
Really?
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, the last one is the Lord's kingdom. Well, not quite the last one, the Lord's kingdom and the Lord. And I wasn't going to spend as much time on these. It's to be loved in a still higher degree. We were talking about the church universal, and I think it sort of gets at that, doesn't it? We love the spiritual life of all humanity in both worlds, in every world. I don't know, are there specific ways that we can love and support that other than just thinking about it and trying to love it? I'm not sure there's anything we can do short of practicing charity on the lower levels. I don't know. Is there? Yeah, the Lord's kingdom. How do we love and serve that and the Lord himself? Well, I want to end by just making 3 observations on how I think we love the common good and our higher neighbors. 3 things that are important. You've already talked about, with Eric, about the facets to the life of love, of loving the neighbor. And they're so important. Beautiful way of structuring our life in a way that enables us to love. But here are three things that I just want to highlight. Dave, consent to unity. You know, the writings say that consent is the essential of marriage. Consent. Willingness to be a unit with that other person. And that's essential to the outset of a relationship. But as has often been observed, it's essential every day. You know, you consent to be a married partner every day. And unless you make that consent, yes, I'm willing to be part of a unit, part of this. I think that's important to loving our higher neighbor, that consent to unity that was spoken of in Last Judgment 12 a couple times. Yeah. Consent, from consentio, to feel with, to perceive with, to sense with. So yeah, consent. The passage goes on. The quality of every form results from the arrangement of the various things within it, from their relationship to each other, and from their consent to unity. So, number one. Number two, this has come up sort of peripherally, but what do the writings say? They say the first thing of charity. The first thing of charity is what? Shun evils of sins. Yeah. And then the second thing is to do goods. It's not that it's more important than the doing of goods, but it is the first priority, because unless we address what's not working, you know, and what's bad, we'll never be able to bring about love. So, interestingly, in relation to the wisdom of life that makes one with conjugal love, Marriage Love says, what is wisdom of life? In a comprehensive summary, it is this: to shun evils, because they are hurtful to the soul, hurtful to the commonwealth, the common good, and hurtful to the body. And to do goods, because they are beneficial to the soul, the commonwealth, and the body. So, number three, and you talked a lot about this, I'm sure, with Eric, but just three passages here, or two. Acting justly and faithfully in one's office, business, and employment is charity itself, because charity may be defined as doing good to the neighbor daily and continually, not only to the neighbor individually, but also to the neighbor collectively. This can only be done through what is good and just in the office, business, and employment in which each person is engaged, and with those with whom they have any dealings. For this is one's daily work. Two more passages here. Use is to perform one's office and to do one's work rightly, faithfully, sincerely, and justly. When this is done, the general common or public good is consulted. Also one's country, the society of greater and less, the fellow citizen, companion, and brother. Christian charity with everyone consists in faithfully performing what belongs to one's calling, for by this, if one shuns evils of sins, one is doing goods every day, and is oneself, one's own use in the general body. In this way also the common good is cared for, and the good of each person in particular. All other things one does are not the proper works of charity, but are either its signs, its benefactions, or its obligations. So, make no mistake, the writings really prioritize what we do each day, whatever that is, to be part of that unity, which is the common good.
The writings also talk about the connection between the material and physical world and the spiritual realms. So, for example, if you're engaged in worship or prayer, reading the Word, perhaps doing good works and charitable things, and there's a connection to the spiritual world in heaven. So they have an awareness that is happening, and it gives them pleasure and support. So in a sense, what we're doing in this world is a foundation for them as well.
Yeah, that's a very lofty way of loving and thinking about the Lord's kingdom. Yeah, it's true.
Are they aware of it though? Are they actually aware of what we're doing? If they weren't necessarily.
I think they're right, except for the fact that they know they can't be in light unless there's a basis, unless people are doing that in the world that connects their thoughts and affections with ultimates, with the outmost things. The Lord just made it that interdependence there. So they do know through the fact that they can be in their love and wisdom. Anyway, thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you very much.